when a simple act of kindness in the snow changed the life of a struggling waitress and gave a disabled boy the joy he had never known. The snow had been falling since morning, covering the streets, rooftops, and trees with a thick white blanket. The little town looked like something out of a postcard, quiet and peaceful under the winter sky. Inside a shiny black SUV parked across the street from a small cafe, Richard Hayes sat with his phone pressed to his ear. His voice was calm but firm. It's the kind of tone that came naturally to a man who had spent years giving orders and closing billion-dollar deals. His eyes were not on the snow outside, but on the numbers glowing on his screen. Richard had built an empire through hard work and relentless ambition. His name was known in boardrooms and business magazines, and many saw him as the perfect image of success. But inside the car, he was not thinking about his son sitting in the back seat. His mind was tangled in conference calls, investments, and schedules. Daniel, his 8-year-old boy, had been quietly staring out of the window for most of the drive. The boy had always loved winter, the way the snow sparkled when sunlight touched it, the way it turned the ordinary world into something magical. Daniel lived with a disability. It made it difficult for him to walk or move around without help. Every step was a challenge, and yet his spirit was unbroken. He often looked at life with more wonder than those who had everything. That day, as the snowflakes drifted down gently from the gray sky, Daniel pressed his face closer to the glass. His eyes lit up with excitement, and he whispered softly, "Dad, can we stop? Please, just for a little while. I want to see the snow." Richard was in the middle of a heated discussion with a business partner and barely registered his son's request. He waved his hand dismissively, muttering, "In a minute, Daniel." But Daniel didn't give up. His voice grew a little stronger, though still sweet and pleading. "Dad, please. I just want to play. I want to touch the snow." The persistence caught Richard's attention for a second. He looked at his son through the rear-view mirror. There was a sparkle in Daniel's eyes that Richard hadn't seen in a long time. With a sigh, he told the person on the other end of the call that he would ring back, then slipped the phone onto the seat beside him. He pulled the SUV over in front of the cafe. "All right," he said, his tone carrying a mixture of impatience and reluctant affection, "but only for a few minutes." The boy's face broke into a smile that warmed the air inside the car, more than the heater ever could. Richard helped Daniel out carefully, making sure his small boots touched the snow-covered pavement. The boy's legs trembled as he stood, but his determination was stronger than his weakness. He leaned slightly on his crutch and took small steps toward the open space of the nearby park. Richard stayed near the car, pulling his coat tighter against the chill. He didn't follow his son immediately, convincing himself that he needed to quickly check his emails before joining him. He tapped his phone screen, scrolling through messages, while Daniel slowly made his way through the snow. The little boy bent down, his gloved hand scooping at the powdery ground, but the snow slipped through his fingers before he could shape it. He tried again and again, struggling to balance himself while bending over, his breath coming out in small clouds. From where he stood, Richard saw his son's effort but remained frozen in place. A part of him wanted to go and help, but another part held him back. He was not used to play, not used to kneeling in the snow and laughing with his child. His life had always been about solving problems with money, about hiring people to handle what he couldn't. Yet watching his son now, he felt something stir in him, a quiet ache he didn't want to name. Daniel, however, didn't notice his father's hesitation. He was too busy trying to shape the snow into something more than a loose pile. His cheeks turned pink from the cold, but his smile never faded. He whispered softly to himself, encouraging his hands to work better, to make the snow stay together. Passersby glanced at him now and then, some with pity, some with simple curiosity. To them, he was just a little boy with difficulty walking, struggling in the snow. But there was one pair of eyes that saw him differently. From inside the cafe, Emily Carter had been carrying a tray of steaming coffee mugs to a table when she noticed the boy outside. She paused, her gaze lingering on the child with the determined little hands. The sight struck her heart like a soft tug. She set the tray down quickly, excused herself with a smile to the customers, and wiped her hands. On her apron, Something inside her wouldn't let her stay inside the warm cafe while that boy was out there alone. Outside, the air was colder than she expected, biting at her skin through her thin sweater. She crossed the street carefully and knelt beside Daniel, her voice gentle. "Hi there," she said, smiling warmly. "That looks like fun. Do you want some help?" Daniel looked up, surprised at first, then grinned shyly. "I'm trying to build a snowman," he explained. His voice carried both excitement and frustration, but it keeps falling apart. "Ah," Emily chuckled softly. "Well, lucky for you, I happen to be very good at building snowmen." She scooped up a handful of snow, pressing it firmly between her palms until it formed a ball. "See, you have to pack it really tight first." She handed the small snowball to Daniel, who held it carefully, his eyes shining with admiration. From the car, Richard watched this exchange unfold. His hand hovered above his phone, but he didn't pick it up this time. Something about the young waitress kneeling beside his son, giving her time and energy without expecting anything in return, routed him to the spot. He noticed the way Daniel's laughter filled the air, bright and unrestrained. Something Richard realized he hadn't heard in months. Daniel and Emily continued working together, rolling the snowball across the ground, making it bigger and bigger. She held his hand sometimes to steady him, cheering him on with every step. His face glowed with happiness, his earlier struggles forgotten. And though the cold pressed against her fingers and numbed her cheeks, Emily didn't mind at all. For her, the joy of seeing the boy laugh was worth far more than the comfort of the cafe's warmth inside the car. Richard's phone buzzed again with urgent notifications, but this time he ignored them. His eyes remained fixed on his son. On the scene unfolding before him, the world of contracts and deals seemed distant, unimportant compared to the simple magic of snow, laughter, and kindness. For the first time in years, he wondered if he had been chasing the wrong things. If perhaps the true measure of wealth was not in the numbers on his screen, but in the smile on his son's face. The snow kept falling, soft and steady, wrapping the little town in silence. But for Richard, time seemed to pause as he watched. Something had shifted, though he couldn't yet explain what. All he knew was that a waitress with kind eyes had stepped into his son's world and unknowingly stirred something deep in his own heart. Inside the cafe, the sound of clinking cups and low conversations filled the air. The warm smell of coffee and freshly baked bread made the place feel cozy against the freezing wind outside. Emily Carter moved quickly between tables, balancing trays of steaming drinks and plates of food. She had been working since early morning, her legs aching from standing too long. But she kept her smile steady for every customer she served. Life had taught her that kindness cost nothing, even when days were hard. Emily was 26, with soft brown hair always tied back in a ponytail, and tired eyes that still carried warmth. Her life was far from easy. She rented a tiny apartment above a laundromat, worked 2 jobs to keep up with bills, and often skipped meals so she could save money. But despite the struggles, she carried herself with quiet strength. She had always believed that even in the middle of hardship, one could still give love to the world. That afternoon, as she wiped down a table near the window, she noticed something outside. Through the glass, she saw a young boy in the snow. Bending down and trying to scoop the powder into his hands, his movements were slow, unsteady, and she could see how much effort it took him just to stay balanced. His small frame wobbled as he leaned on a crutch, his cheeks already flushed pink from the cold. Emily paused, her heart tightening at the sight. She watched as the boy tried again and again to pack the snow into a ball, only for it to crumble apart in his hands. He didn't give up, but she could see his struggle clearly. Round him people walked by, their collars pulled high against the wind, too busy with their own lives to notice him. But Emily noticed. Something about him made her stop everything. Maybe it was the way his eyes shone with determination. Or maybe it was the loneliness she thought she saw in the way. He stood by himself. She glanced toward the street and noticed a sleek black car parked nearby. Through the tinted glass, she caught the faint outline of a man inside. He was watching the boy, but he didn't move to help. Emily didn't know who he was, but she didn't spend much time thinking about it. Her eyes returned to the child. and the decision was made in her heart before her mind even realized it. She pulled off her apron, placed it neatly by the counter, and stepped outside into the biting cold. The wind hit her instantly, sharp and icy, but she didn't care. Her boots crunched in the snow as she crossed toward the boy. She bent down beside him, smiling softly so as not to startle him. "Hi," she said gently, her voice carrying warmth. "That looks like fun. Do you want some help?" The boy turned his face toward her, his big eyes blinking in surprise. For a moment, he hesitated, as if he wasn't used to strangers talking to him. Then his lips curled into a shy smile. "I'm trying to build a snowman," he said, his words almost bursting with excitement, though frustration lingered in his tone. "But the snow won't stay together." Emily laughed lightly, not at him but with him. "That's because you need to pack it tightly first," she explained. She scooped a handful of snow, her fingers pressing it firmly together until it formed a neat ball. "See, like this?" "Ouch." She handed the ball to him. His small hands received it carefully, as though it was something precious. He looked at her with wonder. "Ow," he whispered. "You're really good at this." She grinned. "Well, I've had a lot of practice. When I was your age, I built snowmen every winter. Big ones, small ones, even ones that leaned to the side." She giggled, and the boy's laughter joined hers, ringing out in the cold air. Emily noticed how his legs trembled a little with the effort of standing, so she crouched beside him to help steady him while they began rolling the snowball on the ground.
Ow.
The snow clung together, growing bigger as they pushed it slowly forward. Emily let him take the lead, guiding his hands when he needed it, cheering him on when the ball grew heavier. "Look at you," she encouraged, her tone filled with excitement. "You're doing it. This is going to be the best snowman ever." The boy's smile stretched wide across his face, his earlier struggles forgotten, his laughter carried into the air, light and pure. For Emily, the sound felt like sunshine on a freezing day. She didn't know why, but helping him filled her with a joy she hadn't felt in a long time. Meanwhile, in the black SUV, Richard Hayes sat silently, watching the scene unfold. He'd expected his son to give up quickly, to return to the car frustrated. Instead, Daniel was now laughing more than Richard had seen in months. It wasn't because of him, it was because of a stranger. A waitress, no less. Richard felt a strange mix of emotions. There was gratitude, but also guilt. He had all the resources in the world to give his son happiness, yet it was this young woman who had managed to bring out Daniel's laughter. So, effortlessly, back in the snow, Emily clapped her hands as the base of the snowman grew bigger. "Perfect," she said, brushing the flakes from her palms. "Now we need another one, a little smaller for the body." Daniel nodded eagerly, his eyes bright with determination. Together, they began rolling the next snowball. This one took even more effort, and Daniel stumbled once, almost losing his balance. Emily caught him quickly, steadying his arm without making a fuss. She didn't treat him like he was fragile or incapable. She treated him like a boy who just needed a bit of support, and that made all the difference. "Thanks," Daniel whispered, embarrassed by his stumble. "No need to thank me," Emily replied softly. "You're doing amazing, even the strongest. Snowmen need a little help sometimes." Her words seemed to make him stand taller, his confidence returning as they placed the second snowball on top of the first. Slowly, the snowman began to take shape. Daniel's laughter grew louder, echoing through the quiet street. Emily laughed with him, brushing snow from her coat as flakes settled in her hair. For a brief moment, the world around them seemed to disappear. Emily wasn't thinking about her unpaid bills or her second shift later that night. Daniel wasn't thinking about his disability or the limits of his body. They were just two people in the snow, building something together, sharing a joy that felt bigger than the winter sky above them. From the car, Richard leaned forward, his breath fogging the glass. He had never seen Emily before, yet something about her drew his attention. She didn't know his son, didn't know who he was, and yet here she was, kneeling in the freezing cold, giving her time and kindness to a child she had no reason to care for. She asked for nothing, expected nothing, and yet she gave so much. Richard realized that this was something he couldn't buy, no matter how much money he had. Daniel clapped his hands as the snowman stood tall, a crooked but cheerful figure against the snowy park. Emily bent down laughing. "He did it," she said, giving Daniel a playful huffy. His small hand smacked against hers, and he beamed with pride. In that moment, Emily didn't see a billionaire's son. She didn't see a boy with a disability. She saw only a child who wanted to play, a child whose laughter was worth braving the cold for. And in return, Daniel saw in her not a stranger, but a friend. The snow kept falling gently from the sky, tiny flakes landing on Daniel's coat and melting against his warm cheeks. His laughter echoed through the air as he looked at the snowman standing proudly in front of him. It wasn't perfect. Body leaned a little to one side, and the head was slightly too small but to him. It was the most beautiful snowman in the world. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he had achieved something on his own. Emily stood beside him, brushing snow from her gloves, her cheeks flushed pink from the cold. She looked at the boy with soft pride, as if she had known him forever. Daniel picked up a handful of snow and tried to shape another ball. "We need arms," he said excitedly, "and a nose. Snowmen need noses." His voice carried a mixture of seriousness and delight, as though this snowman was more than just frozen shapes stacked together. It was their creation. Their little friend. Emily laughed, kneeling down to his level. "You're right, every snowman needs character. Let's find some sticks for arms." She looked around the park, where a few bare trees stood with branches stretching toward the cloudy sky. Without hesitation, she walked over, broke off 2 small sticks, and returned to Daniel. She placed them in his hands. "Here," she said. "You're the builder. You decide how he looks." Daniel carefully pushed the sticks into the sides of the snowman, stuck out unevenly, one a little higher than the other, but it made him smile even more. "He looks funny," he said with a giggle, "like he's waving hello." "Exactly," Emily replied. "A very friendly snowman." Next came the nose. Emily looked around, frowning slightly. "I wish we had a carrot," she said. "Every good snowman needs a carrot nose." Daniel's face lit up with an idea. "Maybe the cafe has one," he exclaimed, glancing toward the building where she had been working. Emily hesitated for a moment, then laughed. "You're right. I think we can borrow one. Wait here." She jogged back across the street, her boots kicking up little sprays of snow. Inside, she quickly explained to the cook what she needed. The older man chuckled, shaking his head, but handed her a carrot with a smile. Emily returned triumphantly, holding it up like a prize. "Look what I found," she called out. Daniel clapped his hands in delight. Together, they pressed the carrot into the middle of the snowman's face. It stuck out slightly crooked, but it gave the snowman a cheerful personality. Emily then bent down, scooping up 2 little pebbles for eyes. She handed them to Daniel, who placed them above the carrot. Slowly, the snowman's face came alive, simple but full of charm. When they stepped back to admire their work, Daniel's laughter grew louder, filling the quiet street. His eyes sparkled with joy, brighter than the snowflakes glimmering in the pale winter light. Emily clapped her hands softly. "He's perfect," she said. "What should we name him?" Daniel tilted his head, thinking carefully. Maybe Charlie. He looks like a Charlie." Emily smiled. For a few moments, they stood in silence, just admiring their creation. Daniel's small hand tugged gently at Emily's glove. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice carrying more meaning than the words themselves. "I couldn't have done this without you." Emily's heart softened even more. "You did most of it," she said. "I just gave you a little help. You're stronger than you think, Daniel." Hearing his name made Daniel blink. He hadn't told her what it was, but somehow she had said it as though she had known all along. He looked at her curiously, then decided not to ask. All he felt was a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the winter air. From the car, Richard Hayes had stepped out quietly without either of them noticing. He stood a few feet away, his coat pulled tight around him, but his attention entirely fixed on the scene before him. His son's laughter rang out clearer than it had in months, maybe years. Richard realized how rare it was to see Daniel so carefree, so proud of himself. And all because of a stranger who had knelt down in the snow without hesitation. Richard felt an ache he couldn't ignore. He had given Daniel doctors, tutors, and expensive toys. He had surrounded him with every comfort money could buy. Yet none of it had sparked this kind of joy. None of it had brought out the light now shining in his son's eyes. What Emily gave Daniel wasn't material, it was patience, kindness, and a belief that he could do anything. That, Richard understood in that moment, was something priceless. Daniel, unaware of his father's presence, was busy decorating Charlie further. Emily handed him more small stones, and he lined them down the snowman's body as buttons. "Now he's ready for the cold," Daniel declared proudly. Emily chuckled. "He looks like a gentleman. All he's missing is a hat." Daniel's eyes widened with another idea. He looked up at her eagerly. Emily touched her own head, where a knitted cap kept her warm. Without thinking twice, she pulled it off and placed it gently on top of the snowman. The cold air instantly bit at her ears, but she didn't care. "There," she said with a grin. "Now Charlie is complete." Daniel burst into laughter again, his joy spilling out so naturally that it made Emily laugh too. For a moment, the two of them forgot the world around them, as if it was just the boy, the waitress, and the snowman, standing proudly in the park. Richard stood silently, his throat tight with emotions he rarely allowed himself to feel. He had spent so much of his life climbing higher, chasing more, believing that wealth was the answer to everything. But here he was, standing in the cold, realizing that all the money in the world could not create this kind of happiness. His son's smile wasn't bought with gifts or luxury, it was built with snow, laughter, and the heart of a woman who had nothing yet gave everything. Emily looked at Daniel with tenderness, brushing a bit of snow from his shoulder. "You know," she said softly, "every snowman eventually melts. But the fun we had making him that stays forever." Daniel nodded, his eyes thoughtful. "So even if Charlie's gone tomorrow, we'll still remember him." "That's right," Emily said, smiling. "And we'll remember today, too." The boy's eyes shone as he looked up at her. "I wish we could build more snowmen together," he said innocently. Emily's heart tightened, not knowing what to say. She wanted to promise him they would, but she wasn't sure if life would allow it. Still, she smiled and said maybe. "We will." Behind them, Richard finally stepped forward. He cleared his throat softly, and both Emily and Daniel turned to look at him. Daniel's smile widened when he saw his father, but Emily quickly straightened, feeling suddenly self-conscious. She had been so caught up in the moment that she had forgotten someone might be watching. Richard's eyes met hers, and for a brief second, neither spoke. He wanted to thank her, to explain how much this simple act had meant, but the words stuck in his throat. Instead, he looked down at his son, then back at the snowman. A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, a rare sight for a man so used to hiding his emotions. Daniel, still glowing with pride, pointed at their creation. "Dad, look, this is Charlie. Emily helped me make him." His voice was bursting with excitement, desperate to share his joy. Richard nodded slowly. "Charlie looks wonderful," he said, his voice quieter than usual. He glanced at Emily again, his eyes carrying something unspoken: gratitude, respect, maybe even guilt. She nodded back politely, unsure of what to say. The snowman stood tall. Between them, crooked and imperfect but full of life. It wasn't just a figure made of snow. For Daniel, it was proof that he could do something he thought was impossible. For Emily, it was a reminder that small acts of kindness could create moments of magic. And for Richard, it was a mirror, showing him how much he had been missing while chasing after wealth as the snow continued to fall. Soft and endless, the three of them stood together for a moment that felt timeless, connected not by money or duty, but by the simple joy of a boy, a waitress, and a snowman built with love. The week passed quietly, but Richard Hayes could not get the memory of that snowy afternoon out of his mind. No matter how many meetings he attended, how many calls he took, or how many reports he read, the picture of his son laughing beside the waitress in the snow returned again and again. He remembered Daniel's smile, brighter than he had seen in years, and the sound of his carefree laughter. It was a sound that had been missing in their home for far too long. Richard had tried tutors, doctors, therapists, and even expensive gadgets meant to make Daniel's life easier. No. But none of it had ever brought him that kind of joy. Yet one young woman had managed it with nothing more than patience, warmth, and a little snow. Richard found himself replaying that moment in his head at night, long after Daniel had gone to sleep. He would sit in his study, staring at the city lights through the tall windows, wondering what it was about that waitress that had made such a difference. He didn't even know her name at first. She had been just a face in the cold, a stranger who had stepped out of her world to enter his son's, but the impact she had left was undeniable. Daniel had not stopped talking about her. At breakfast one morning, as Richard poured coffee into his mug, Daniel tapped his spoon against the table and said, "Dad, do you think Emily will help me build another snowman?" Richard looked up, surprised. "Emily, says her name," Daniel said proudly, as if holding on to a precious secret. "The nice lady from the cafe. She told me her name when you weren't looking. She said she's good at building snowmen. But I think she's just good at making people happy." He had never heard Daniel speak about anyone with such affection, not even his teachers or caretakers. Something about Emily had touched the boy deeply. And so, later that day, Richard made a decision. He told his driver to take him back to the small cafe. When he stepped inside, the warmth and smell of coffee surrounded him, but he hardly noticed. His eyes scanned the room until he saw her Emily, moving quickly between tables with a tray in her hands. She looked tired, her hair slightly messy from the long shift, but her smile never wavered as she greeted the customers. Richard waited until she had set the tray down and was heading back to the counter before approaching. She noticed him instantly, her eyes widening slightly in recognition. For a moment, she froze, then quickly adjusted her posture, wiping her hands on her apron nervously. "Hello," she said politely, though her tone carried a hint of surprise. "I didn't expect to see you here again." Richard nodded, his expression calm but serious. "I wanted to thank you," he said, "for what you did for my son." Emily shook her head quickly. "You don't need to thank me. Just wanted someone to build a snowman with. I was happy to help." Her words were simple, but Richard heard the sincerity in them. She had not done it for recognition, nor for any reward. She had done it because it was in her nature to be kind. He studied her for a moment, then spoke carefully. "I don't usually do this, but I'd like to make you an offer." Emily blinked, confused. "An offer?" "Yes," Richard replied. "Daniel needs someone like you in his life. Someone patient, someone who sees him not as fragile, but as capable. I want you to consider working for me, not at the cafe. I want you to be with Daniel, to spend time with him, to give him the encouragement he needs." Emily's eyes widened. In shock, she almost laughed, thinking she must have misheard him. "Work for you? As what, exactly?" As his companion, Richard explained. "You wouldn't just be helping him with daily things. You'd be giving him what I cannot, your time, your heart, your patience. I can pay you more than this cafe ever could. You wouldn't have to worry about money again." Emily felt her stomach twist. The idea was overwhelming. She had come to work that day like any other, ready to earn her modest wages. And suddenly, a billionaire was standing in front of her, offering her a completely different life. She stared at him, unsure what to say. "I don't know," she admitted quietly. "I've never done anything like that before. I'm not trained. I'm just a waitress." Richard shook his head. "You underestimate yourself. You gave Daniel something no professional ever has. You made him believe in himself. It's more valuable than training or degrees. You have a gift, and I saw it with my own eyes." Emily bit her lip, looking down at her worn shoes. Part of her wanted to accept instantly. The money alone would change her life. She was behind on rent, struggling with bills, and constantly exhausted from working 2 jobs. But another part of her hesitated. What if she wasn't good enough? What if she failed Daniel? She didn't want to take on something so important if she wasn't sure she could do it. "I don't know if I can," she whispered. Richard's voice softened, losing some of its usual business-like edge. "You already have. That day in the snow, you gave Daniel something I couldn't. I can give him everything money can buy. But I can't give him what you did: a laughter, joy, belief in himself. He needs you more than you realize. Emily looked up, meeting his eyes. For the first time, she saw not the billionaire businessman, but a father. His gaze carried both pride and pain, the weight of someone who had achieved everything in the world except the one thing he wanted most: his son's happiness. The cafe door opened then, and a rush of cold air swept inside. Richard stepped back. Realizing he was asking too much all at once, he pulled a card from his coat pocket and set it on the counter. "Think about it," he said simply. "Call me when you're ready. No pressure." Emily stared at the card long after he left. Name Richard Hayes was printed in bold letters, followed by a number. She knew who he was now, had heard his name in the news before, always spoken with admiration and respect. He was one of the richest men in the country, and yet when he spoke about his son, he hadn't sounded like a billionaire. He had sounded like a desperate father. That night, Emily lay awake in her small apartment, staring at the ceiling. Her mind kept going back to Daniel's laughter, the way his eyes had lit up when the snowman took shape. She remembered how he had thanked her, how he had wished they could build more snowmen together. She thought about her own life, how each day was a struggle just to survive. And she wondered if perhaps helping Daniel wasn't just about changing his life, it might change hers too. The next day after her shift, Emily found herself holding the card again. She turned it over in her hands, her heart racing. Finally, with trembling fingers, she dialed the number. When Richard answered, his voice calm and deep, she took a breath and said softly, "I'll do it. I'll help Daniel." On the other end, Richard didn't hide the relief in his tone. "Thank you, Emily," he said. "You won't regret it." And with that decision, Emily's life began to change in ways she could never have imagined. From the moment Emily agreed to help Daniel, her life transformed in ways she had never imagined. The first day she arrived at the Hayes residence, she felt nervous, unsure how a boy so quiet and reserved outside the cafe would respond to her presence in his home. But as soon as Daniel saw her, his face lit up with the same excitement she had witnessed that snowy afternoon. He ran toward her, arms outstretched, and shouted, "Emily, you came." The sound of his voice filled the house with a warmth that neither money nor luxury could ever buy. Richard watched from the doorway, a mixture of relief and gratitude in his eyes. He had hoped Daniel would accept Emily, but seeing the genuine connection between them filled him with something deeper than hope. It filled him with awe. Emily quickly settled into her new role. She spent her days with Daniel, guiding him through activities, helping him practice movements and exercises that encouraged his mobility, and, most importantly, giving him the kind of attention that made him feel confident and loved. At first, Emily focused on small, manageable goals. They would start with simple indoor games, gradually moving to more active exercises, always making it fun. She knew that pushing Daniel too hard would discourage him, but encouraging him with patience and praise made him willing to try new things. Daniel began to take small steps on his own, his confidence growing with each success. Emily would cheer for every effort, no matter how small, turning each moment into a celebration. Soon she introduced creative activities. They built miniature snowmen indoors with cotton and clay, made paper crafts, and painted pictures of the snowy day that had brought them together. Through these exercises, Daniel's coordination and creativity improved, but more importantly, he began to smile freely, laugh often, and show curiosity about the world around him. Emily taught him to enjoy each moment, to celebrate progress rather than dwell on difficulties. And Daniel responded in ways Richard had only dreamed of. Emily's influence extended beyond physical and creative growth. Daniel had always struggled to express his emotions clearly, often withdrawing into silence when frustrated or upset. But with Emily, he learned to speak about his feelings. He confided small worries to her, shared stories about school, and even joked with her in a way he had never done with anyone else. Emily's calm and patient demeanor allowed him to feel safe, and he began to trust not only her, but also himself. Richard observed all of this with gratitude and amazement. He had tried everything money could by special therapists, advanced devices, even tutors, but none had connected with Daniel the way Emily did. She had discovered a way to reach him without force or instruction, simply by seeing him as a person rather than a patient or a challenge. It was a lesson Richard would never forget. Outside of their sessions, Emily also encouraged Daniel to interact with others. They started taking short walks in the neighborhood, where Daniel would wave at neighbors and smile at children playing outside. Emily taught him social cues gently, praising him when he remembered to greet someone or offer a friendly gesture. Daniel's world was expanding, and with it, his confidence and sense of belonging. At home, Emily became part of the family rhythm. She helped Daniel with homework, prepared healthy snacks, and even learned his favorite songs to sing together. She wasn't just a caretaker. She became a companion, a friend, and a mentor. And through it all, Daniel's relationship with his father began to shift as well. Richard noticed that Daniel was more willing to open up to him, sharing details of his day with a sparkle in his eyes. He laughed more at Richard's jokes, asked him questions about his work, and even began helping in small ways around the house. Proud of his own accomplishments, Emily's impact wasn't limited to Daniel alone. Richard began to see changes in himself as well. Watching someone care for his son with such patience and dedication reminded him of the importance of family and attention beyond wealth and status. He started to take more time away from work to spend moments with Daniel, joining them in small activities and even playing snowball games in the backyard, something he had never done in years. The house, once quiet and formal, began to feel alive with laughter, conversation, and warmth. Over time, Emily's commitment to Daniel never wavered. She began introducing small challenges to help him grow further, encouraging him to try simple sports, guiding him through exercises to strengthen his body, and nurturing his mind with puzzles and stories. Daniel, inspired by her unwavering support, began to set small goals for himself. Each goal he achieved brought him pride, and each step forward strengthened the bond between him and Emily. As the seasons changed, the bond between Emily and Daniel became undeniable. Winter, which had once brought hesitation and quiet days, now meant building snowmen, sledding, and sharing laughter outside. Spring brought gardening, outdoor painting, and exploring the neighborhood. Emily encouraged Daniel to notice the world around him, the colors, sounds, and smells that he had previously ignored. She turned ordinary moments into adventures, showing him that life could be both challenging and beautiful. Emily's presence also inspired others in their lives. The household staff noticed Daniel's increased confidence and cheerfulness, and they, too, began to engage with him more actively, learning from Emily's example. Friends and relatives visiting the Hayes residence were struck by the visible transformation in Daniel, and they often complimented Emily's dedication and patience, but she never sought recognition. Her joy came from seeing Daniel smile, laugh, and believe in himself. Richard, deeply moved by what he had witnessed, made a quiet promise to Emily one evening. He told her that he wanted to ensure her life was stable, that she would have every opportunity she deserved, and that her efforts would never go unrecognized. Emily, who had only known struggle and uncertainty, found herself in a place where she could grow, learn, and be valued, not for her job title or wealth, but for the difference she made in a single young boy's life. By the end of the first year, the changes in Daniel were remarkable. He'd grown stronger, both physically and emotionally, was more expressive, adventurous, and confident. Emily had become an inseparable part of his daily life, and he often asked when she would be with him next if she ever had to leave. Richard realized that Emily had given him far more than he could have hoped for. She had given his son a sense of normalcy, joy, and confidence, and in doing so, had reshaped their entire family dynamic. Emily, too, had changed. Being a young woman barely managing her life at a cafe to someone who had a purpose, someone whose talents and compassion were recognized and valued. She learned patience, resilience, and the profound impact a single act of kindness could have. Every day she spent with Daniel strengthened her understanding of the human spirit and reminded her that true value wasn't measured in wealth, in love, attention, and care. Over time, the bond between Emily and the Hayes family became something extraordinary. She had not only helped Daniel, but had inspired Richard and the household to see the world with more patience and compassion. The simple act of building a snowman had become the start of a journey that transformed their lives forever. And as Emily watched Daniel run through the yard, laughing freely, she understood something she had never known before, that one person, with kindness and care, could truly change another person's life, and in the process, change her own. Emily's story, once ordinary and filled with struggle, became a tale of transformation, hope, and the power of genuine human connection. And for Daniel, every snowman, every game, every shared laugh became a reminder that life, with the right guidance and love, could be filled with endless possibilities.